The Kamala Harris media blitz continues. Harris appeared on The View to give us a sneak peek of what to expect from her as president.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Let's hope we never have to figure out if that's going to happen or not. Here to discuss is our senior politics editor, Chris Bedford. So, Chris, I look at this interview and Kamala's something old and something new. She's her own person, but she's still the current vice president. What is the lane that she is trying to pick right now?
You know, it's funny. She's tried to distance herself from Joe Biden, but she still hasn't come up with like a very good line in response to, all right, well, what are the differences between you and Joe Biden? Her whole Vibes campaign was about being a different person, a new path forward. We can't go back to apparently what's right now. But she can't actually figure it out. It kind of reminds me, I rode a Vespa for years in D.C., and I had this helmet, and I'd walk into these meetings, and inevitably some girl would walk up and say, what kind of motorcycle do you have? And I never came up with a good answer. I always had to say a Vespa. It's super embarrassing every time. You'd think when you're the president, running to be president, and you've got a whole team coming up with this thing, that maybe you could actually come up with a better answer than this. And you know what's funny is the whole time this was going on, Joe Biden, who usually hasn't seen that often, has been undermining her. He's been blasting on. He was on TV on Friday, did a press conference when she was talking in Michigan, union labor. Heck, he did another press conference today when she was on The View. And I watched them both and caught up with them both. And she just hasn't figured out quite yet what to do. And you know what else I've noticed from this interview and the other interviews that she's been doing, because I'm watching them all so you guys don't have to, is she doesn't even seem that excited. She seems low energy. She seems tired. Like she's interviewing for a job she doesn't really want. She could just cash in and go on the speaker circuit. This policy stuff seems to bore her. Talking about things other than politics, well, she's happy to do that. But politics, not her strong suit. Funny when you're running for president.
Funny indeed. A little alarming, even. Chris, we have a mutual friend who used to drive a Vespa and would just get it out of the way in the beginning of every conversation. Like before we started the walk, from the coffee shop, he'd be like, oh, by the way, I have a Vespa and it's because I'm Canadian. Which
I bought mine from Tucker because he didn't pay any of us enough to have cars, and his wife wouldn't let him have the Vespa anymore because he doesn't pay attention to stop signs or stoplights or other traffic laws, which is actually dangerous on two wheels. So she said, sell it to Chris. It's fun.
Well, I'm glad you stayed safe on it. I look at her right now and you think this has got to change. She's going to have to try to change to whatever we call it, 2.0, 3.0. Do you have any idea of what that will be like? Because I don't think she can continue to drift like this. And we still have a bit of time left going into the final stretch.
Basically the last 30 days. And this is the new strategy. I mean, there was a lot of clamoring for Joe Biden to get out of the bunker and to get out there and do press. And after he was knocked out and usurped, Kamala Harris became the new person, and they had to do that bunker strategy again. But they're looking at the internal polling. They're seeing her doing significantly worse than Joe Biden. They see her doing worse in some states than Hillary Clinton was polling against Donald Trump. And that really frightens them. They're worried that the floors are going to drop out in the last 30 days. The Republicans have slowly but surely gotten their acts together. You start to see Sunday Football has got ads up. Her lines about paying for transgender transition surgery for inmates in prisons has been doing really well and moving men a lot when they're playing these ads with the NFL. And Democrats are starting to worry. You see Andrea Mitchell out there talking about how they've got a man problem. You see pollsters saying, well, Democrats have difficulty right now reaching white men and black men and Hispanic men and old men and young men, which basically just means they've united all of manhood against them. So this strategy is the beginning of that. It could reach up to 20 million viewers, estimated by the time she finishes Thursday night. But she's still not talking to men, really. She's out there on The View. She's out there on Call Her Daddy. Dudes don't listen to that. So this is, I think, them dipping their toe in. 60 Minutes, of course, where she didn't do that well. And those weren't gotcha questions. They were just serious questions. journalistic questions where the reporter wasn't going to let her give non-answers. Right now, the way it's looking, I kind of think the bottom falls out for her in the last 30 days. She just doesn't have the capacity to change from who she is.
Well, you mentioned the 60 Minutes interview, so let's just dive into that because I loved it when she went out and she claimed to have the same firearm that she's also tried to ban. And she also went out there, and I think the worst part of it is she tried to defend her record on the southern border. Let's take a listen.
Was it a mistake to kind of allow that flood to happen in the first place?
I think the policies that we have been proposing are about fixing a problem, not promoting a problem. Okay?
But the numbers did quadruple.
And the numbers today,
watch.
because of what we have done, we have cut the flow of illegal immigration by half.
But should you
we
have
have
done
cut
that?
the
Should you
flow
have
of
done that?
fentanyl by half, but we need Congress to be able to act to actually fix the problem.
To me, something interesting with that interview in particular is she's getting that pushback that I don't think that she's gotten very much of thus far. Oh. But I want to ask you, though, I mean, she's out there. She's trying her best to convince people that she's effective with the southern border. Is anybody actually going to believe this?
I'm really doubtful. And I'm also really doubtful that the kind of people who are watching 60 Minutes, which is typically used to be a fairly in-depth news program, haven't made up their minds already on who they're going to vote for. It's an interesting crowd, but I guess she hopes that it amplifies. I started just taking notes about 2 minutes into that interview because it was like watching an SNL skit of political platitudes. And she used a lot of the same lines in The View. Leaders should lift people up, not put them down. We're about developing consensus and unity and moving forward together with a strong America. There was one point where Kamala Harris looked at this, serious reporter and said, I am running for president of the United States. She was just using time like a child doing a book report for a book they haven't read. Such banalities. And it was good to see the interviewer was civil, polite, but firm, and wouldn't let her get out of some of these things. When she was saying, well, we'll pay for this, when she refused to answer how she was going to pay for some of her proposals, she talked about all these different other platitudes. The reporter came back and said, well, no, the question was how you're going to pay for it. And then when she said, well, we're just going to raise the taxes on the rich, he said, well, you have to operate in the real world. But Congress ain't going to do that. You're not going to get a bunch of U.S. senators in difficult districts to say, yeah, we'll vote for more taxes so we can help out Kamala Harris's big spending plans. That kind of pushback she's been unable to answer to. She can go if you want to ask her about immigration and you're satisfied with her answer that she grew up in a middle-class family, well, then you'll be fine. But if you're actually looking for real answers, the Democrats don't really have them.
Chris, your prognostication here is getting me way too excited that my wildest dreams would come true, which is that cold, hard reality would come crashing down around the absurdity of running this woman for office. But, that's very hopeful. But why don't you give us a little bit of a rundown on the Senate? Because this is going to be a huge battle and some interesting things are going on there. I know in Wisconsin and other places.
Yes, absolutely. The Senate, I think, at this point is probably not a winnable target for Democrats. I think Chuck Schumer's days as the majority leader are going to be coming to a close. The map you knew from the very beginning was going to be a tough one. You have places like Montana, which is actually a kind of a strange state. It's a little hippie-ish in some ways. There's a lot of environmentalist kind of green movement out there that mixes in with the ranchers and the cowhands that are more like they're conservationists for sure, but they're not out there chomping on granola and pretending to be Indians at protests. And Tester's going to lose. I mean, at this point, he's throwing water at and attacking the administration, which is making his job more difficult. I mean, the Department of Education literally just cut off money from Montana colleges over transgender stuff. And that's a dumb thing to do when you're trying to win that Senate seat. Ohio is also a place where Democrats are in trouble. And these are states where you've kind of had these Joe Manchin type figures, because at this point, Ohio's not purple. When we were younger covering this stuff, Ohio was purple. Now it's pretty thoroughly red. So you're going to see Sherrod Brown there probably going down to a well-run campaign. And now you see in the Cook Political Report, as of today, states like Wisconsin are starting to look like toss-ups as opposed to lean Democrat. And that's some of the coattails, honestly, of Donald Trump, who was competing in places like Wisconsin, and he was competing in places like Michigan. And it causes trouble. The Democrat running for Senate in Wisconsin is running ahead of Kamala Harris and is still potentially in danger. Now, a lot of the times, pundits and pollsters get excited. They start to predict waves. And usually what ends up happening is more expected things. But even if it stays completely within the range of respectability, I think you're looking at whoever it ends up being, a new Republican majority leader in the Senate. And then you see a House of Representatives that basically just falls in line.
Well, you're definitely giving off Professor Bedford vibes today. But
it's fall now.
It is fall. But the question remains, do you still drive the Vespa?
No, it got stolen. And the second time it got stolen, I didn't get it back. The first time I did, a little beat up.
Well, there it is. These are the answers that we really wanted to know. So thank you for bringing all of the hard-hitting facts and the Vespa answers for us. Bedford, thanks so much.